I've been fortunate that I haven't had any major serious health problems apart from the diagnosis itself, but I have little things that go wrong. And there are those days when I discover something has returned as a problem, and there's this feeling of, oh, I don't know if I can keep this up. I get almost tired of the work of trying to keep it all together and trying to fight it, and it keeps me constantly reminded of having to check in with, is it worth doing this, you know? I wouldn't want anybody to have to go through that, but in a certain sense I can also see it sort of keeps me in touch with keeping my life meaningful.
A.J. Roosevelt Williams described himself as a 43-year-old gay African-American, the oldest of 6 children raised on welfare in the ghettos of Oakland. Initially diagnosed with AIDS in 1982, A.J. has remained essentially healthy since 1984, the year his KS lesions went into remission. A.J. receives acupuncture, watches his diet, and takes a variety of herbs and vitamins.
I had a whole series of responses to the news. And I'm often hesitant to talk about them because they seem complicated and difficult to explain. But on one level, I was glad. At the time this took place in my life, I was very unhappy with my job. I didn't like living in New York City. And there was something happening with me being a gay black man in New York that was unsettling, that I didn't like. And somehow having this diagnosis was like being given license to stop everything. It was like, okay, now you've got your reason, now you've got your excuse to leave the job, to leave New York, to turn your life around. Another important part of that response that I felt was like being told you're about to have a major fight. And it was a fight somehow I knew I wanted to have, because it was just something inside of me knew that this was the fight that would give my life meaning and purpose. Yeah, I had been told I didn't have long to live, but it was just automatic in me to realize that the truth of that was up to me, whether or not I had long to live. That indeed, you know, people had been told they were going to die of cancer and they were given 6 months to live, and 20 years later they're still alive. So I knew, and I thought, if that's a possibility, that does happen for some people, then it can happen for me. I thought next, if that can happen for me, then I must uncover what there is for me to do to make that a possibility in my life. I was beginning to see how, as a black man, I had internalized certain of the racist messages I had grown up with, such that I could see how choices I had made in my life were coming out of not believing in myself, had come out of not loving myself, that I had indulged myself in ways that were self-destructive, that indeed did make the ground fertile for this virus. You know, we're in Oakland, California, and the Oakland Tribune is a local town paper. On Sundays, there's a magazine in that paper called the Parade magazine. They featured an article on long-term AIDS survivors. Now, Oakland is a majority city of minority people. Not one person of color was mentioned in that article. In a paper owned by a black man in a town that's majority minority. I mean, there's such incredible discrepancies to me in terms of how people are looking at this disease and dealing with it. And the hard part about all of that for me is that it outrages me. It pisses me off, and I'm angry and at times bitter. And I realize that I pay the price for that anger and bitterness, that it's my immune system that becomes stressed by feeling that way. So part of the problem I've had to deal with in coping with this disease is, how do I take a real hard look at what life is about and how things are, and be honest about that, but go on and make some kind of positive response to it that frees me. I think I've survived this disease for a number of different reasons. Be clear, first of all, that my life isn't over, and at some point it will be over, and it may be over at that point because of AIDS. So I have survived thus far. And there are lots of different reasons why. I think it's some of the things I've done with my life in terms of the nutritional sorts of things I do, in terms of eating carefully, perhaps including certain herbs and vitamins in my life. I think on another level, spiritually, there are things I've done that contribute to why I've survived. And most importantly, I think it comes out of the willingness to suffer and the willingness to feel pain. And I don't mean by that wallowing in suffering or pain, but not running from it. Unfortunately, I think it's become popular in our society to try and explain away hurt and pain as if somehow there's something wrong with the experience of it. There is a popular idea that if one's experiencing hurt, it's because there's something wrong with you and you are creating that in your own life, because what you experience is what you create. There's a horrible kind of guilt that goes along with that I think is real self-destructive. At the same time, while I don't want to encourage anyone to wallow or rationalize some kind of virtue in hurting yourself, there's something very important to be discovered in our ability to transcend pain, to rise above it and discover meaning in it. And we can only do that to the degree that we're willing to let it be there and not run from it. And very often what seemed most frightening and painful to me, by my willingness to let it be there and to feel it, I've discovered that it was not nearly the frightening or painful thing that I thought it was. But I only knew that by my willingness to surrender to it. It's hard. And while we like to think maybe that with problems, the more you have it, the longer the time you spend with it, it gets easier, but it doesn't get any easier. The loneliness that surrounds AIDS hurts. Despite all that we've learned about this disease, it still seems to be reason enough for people to want to reject you, to not want to live around you, to not want to touch you. I don't have answers for that one. That's a hard one. Sometimes I feel in a kind of spiritual way, that's just the challenge I have to accept, that it is a lonely experience, and I have to struggle with not being defeated by that loneliness. And maybe to try and have the confidence that it won't always be like this, that not everyone's going to be afraid of hugging or touching or loving, to be more truthful, and that maybe there is someone out there at some point, despite all the problems, who might be willing to take that chance with me. I'm now living with my youngest brother, who's a policeman. The last time I knew this guy, and I think it's fair to say even knew him, was 25 years ago when he was 6 years old. And through a series of circumstances that I had no idea were going to happen and was not a part of any dream, I'm now living with my brother. And yesterday, his daughter, my niece, who's 3 years old, was over, and she was saying to him, "Uncle Roosevelt, he's your best friend, isn't he?" And my brother looked at me and said, "Yes, he's my best friend." I would never in 1,000 years have dreamed that that was ever going to happen for me in life with somebody from my family. I left home when I was 16 years old because my mother tried to kill me, and I have never been back. You know, I have nothing to do with brothers or sisters. In all those years, I've accepted that certain of my gay friends are my real family, and now I've got a brother that I actually like and who likes me, and that wasn't a part of any dream. And part of that happened because of a willingness to be open to what my life was presenting me at the time.